The book of Exodus is the story of the God who sees, hears, and delivers his people in their most desperate moments. It's a powerful reminder that we serve a God who shows up in the midst of oppression, pain, and uncertainty. And in this sermon series, we will take a step into the story and witness for ourselves how God reveals himself to the world.
Good morning. There's a lot of faces I don't recognize, and my name is Noah, preaching minister here, and we welcome you and are thankful that you're with us. Hope you'll stay in fellowship with us afterwards down the stairs, as Grady mentioned, and hope to get to know you there. I want to start off with a question this morning as we begin a new series, and that is this. Have you ever been promised something only to be left waiting for the promise to be fulfilled? And you're just waiting and waiting. Whether it's a friend who you have a coffee arrangement or getting lunch and they send a text and they'll be right there, but you know from past times, you know it's going to be a few minutes. And maybe we've all sort of been guilty of that before in our life, or if you're more time-oriented, maybe not, but if not, if you're like the rest of us, maybe you've done that before. Or maybe someone texts you, I'll be there in 5 minutes, and you look, it's been 10 minutes, and they text, again, I'll be there in 5, and you're like, they're not going to be there in 5 minutes. You've just accepted it. It's not happening. Or maybe it's a package from Amazon that will arrive today. Now, Amazon Prime has gotten us so acquainted with and so used to having packages almost immediately after we order them. In fact, if it's like over 2 days shipping, I'm just like, I wish I wouldn't have even bought it at this point, We've just become so spoiled. But if you've ever had it where the package was supposed to be delivered on a certain day and it's now it's now way past the delivery window and it's still set, like say your delivery window is like 8 to 9 p.m. and then it's 10:30 and you go back and check it and says it'll be delivered by 8:30. And well, we're past that already and we're still waiting for our package. Or what about this? What about that friend who always owes you $5? And they always say, hey, I'm going to, hey, can you spot me or whatever? And then, hey, I'll pay you back. And you know darn well they're not going to pay you back. All right, they've bought 3 cars, they've had 3 kids, they've been to Disney 4 times. You're not getting your $5, all right? It's not happening. You know it, but you're waiting. You haven't received it. Or to me, this is the worst. This is like one of my pet peeves, is the service person who will arrive between the window of 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Not like you have anything to do that day, but to just wait around and maybe they'll pop in from 8, maybe around 2, not sure. Have you had that before? Maybe it's your internet, maybe it's your AC, whatever, and they're giving you a window. Any time today we might show up and we expect you to be here, to be ready to answer the door for us there. And you're just waiting around. My luck is, this always happens. They will show up or call me at 1:55 p.m. and now that window now extends to the rest of the afternoon. It's kind of a funny story with that. Earlier this year, we were ordering a dishwasher. I won't name the company because they ended up making it right with me. So I don't want to use my tiny platform to hurt them as a company. But you can ask my parents; they don't have that same obligation. They'll tell you which company it was. And so ordered dishwasher, and it was through one company, but they do their delivery through a third-party company. Okay, great, got a great deal on it, and so it's one of these window type things. And so I was like, okay. Tell the office, hey, they're going to be coming around this time. I'm just going to work from home. Let me know what you need. And so I'm sitting there waiting. As you'd imagine, they never come. Okay, that's frustrating. I call, and we're already an hour past the window. And I call them and say, hey, I'm waiting for the dishwasher delivery. And they're like, yeah, they're going to be there by 5. I'm like, it's 6, okay? And just waiting, and then okay, let's reschedule it. And so we reschedule it, same thing, another window. We're going to come between this time and that time. And again, it kind of, even if you go to work that day, right, you're not making as many appointments. You're not going to make a lunch with someone because you don't know, are they going to call, and you got to be there in 20 minutes. And sure enough, a second time, it happens, and they don't come during the window. And call them. I get a little credit. I can tell you, if you ask me about it after, I can tell you how to work those service calls to get a discount when they do that to you. It happens a third time. Like, it just keeps happening. I'm just assuming I'm not getting this dishwasher. And we're like prepping for Samuel to arrive, and we're thinking we're not going to have a dishwasher, and he's not going to be able to grow up and to have a dishwasher one day. But it just kept going and going and going and waiting. We finally got our dishwasher, but I hate that. So now anytime, like, here's a window between that, I'm like, yeah, okay, just call me when you're going to come, and I will get there when I can get there. And if I'm not there yet, you'll have to wait a minute. So I hate that. I hate the window. You know, it's all kind of fun and games when it's our friends and these funny, silly situations, but we also experience this as we're waiting for a promise to be fulfilled. Sometimes in more serious situations. Maybe it's that job offer that you were hoping for, looking for. Maybe they even sort of led you on, like you were a top candidate, but that job offer never came. Maybe it was a health diagnosis or a report, a test that was being done, and you've got to wait and wait. They're like, we'll call you anytime in the 2 to 4 weeks, and you're in that transition of not knowing what the diagnosis actually is. Could be a relationship promise. Someone made a promise to you, a friend, a family member, a spouse, a coworker, a neighbor, and you expected them to carry through on their promise. They wanted to help you out, or they promised to do better, and yet you're left waiting as that promise seems to just be falling apart. Or it could be a reconciliation in a relationship in your life. Again, friend, family member, spouse, things to be set right that you hoped would take place. Maybe it's a child who, your son or your daughter, who there's an estranged relationship there, and you're hoping for reconciliation. And there's some things they've got to recognize and things you have to recognize in order for that to happen. But you're just, in the meantime, you're kind of left in the middle, just waiting and longing for that promise to be fulfilled. It could be promises of justice. Maybe you've been wronged in some way. Someone's hurt you, someone's harmed you, and it's in this legal process, and you're just left waiting. You're left waiting for things to be set right, and you've kind of lost hope that they will. And the truth is, in all these different situations, there's something that's actually sort of predictable, if you will. And that is this, is that people will let us down. And I know I sound a bit like a cynic there. And I sound, well, that's a great way to look at the world, Noah, is that people will let us down. But we know from personal experience that is true in many cases. At some level, not always equal, not at always at every situation at the same equal level. Nevertheless, humans are predictable. We fail, we mess up. And the best evidence of that is the person who looks at you in the mirror in the morning. Because we fail people. We fail ourselves at some times. And so it's predictable that the human beings, men and women, brothers and sisters, family members, that we're going to let each other down sometimes. And that's true in God's church as well. And maybe you've had experience along with that. But here's a heavier question. As we think about the things we wait for in life and promises we hope to be fulfilled, what about when it's God's promises that we're waiting for? Maybe we're waiting for healing. We've asked God to heal a family member, to heal something we're struggling with, to heal a situation. And we know that God hears us, or we believe God hears us, and he says he'll act on our behalf, and yet you're left waiting. Maybe it's a financial breakthrough. Maybe you've lived paycheck to paycheck over and over again, or you struggle in a season of unemployment, and you're waiting for God to create an opportunity. Because again, you know that He's in Matthew chapter 6, that if we seek the kingdom of God, all the other small things in life are going to fall into place, and we're waiting. It could be that we're waiting for deliverance from an addiction, a habit, or a temptation. We're told that God's not going to allow us to be tempted beyond what we're able, yet there's seasons in our life we find ourselves like, but why does this feel so hard? Why can't I stop doing what I want to stop doing? Why can't I stop doing what I know's destroying my life or destroying my relationships? Perhaps you find yourself in this valley, this cycle, just waiting for God to deliver you. Or maybe you're waiting for an opportunity of a relationship or a spouse, and you're longing to have a companion in life, and you've asked God to answer. You've asked God to provide someone to provide that companionship to you. Or a relationship. Maybe you've been praying for a child. Or maybe you've been praying for an opportunity for adoption or foster care. Yet you find yourself waiting and waiting. And then the last one here, maybe you find yourself waiting for direction and purpose. We've got so many of our high schoolers, some of our seniors who are moving on to the next stage. We've got college kids in our church who are asking what's next. But the truth is, there's some of you this morning, maybe you're thinking about a transition of some kind or what the next opportunity is, or you love your job, but you said, I want to be a part of something bigger than myself, and I don't know what that looks like apart from my work or in addition to my work. Or maybe it's that you want your family to be more intentional in seeking Christ and coming to his feet, but you have a sense of loss of words and to know how to do that. There's a sense of direction. Maybe you want to step into God's mission, but it doesn't seem like there's been many opportunities around you to be a disciple maker. And you're looking for those opportunities, direction, and a purpose in life. And we're left with that question in those valleys and moments in our life where it seems like God is silent. We ask that question, why has God not yet fulfilled his promises? Now, most of us probably find ourselves at some point in life waiting for opportunities we believe we've asked for in prayer and that we've looked for and that we think God would want us to take part in. But maybe you're in one of those moments right now, this morning. You're in one of those valleys, you're in one of those cycles where you're asking God to act, yet he seems silent, distant, and unresponsive. And those opportunities aren't coming your way. If you're there this morning, then I encourage you. Because as we start this series of Exodus, we learn of this people group, this nation called Israel. And as we open up the book of Exodus, they found themselves in that very situation that so many of us have found ourselves in before. We're in that valley, that cycle, that moment, waiting for God to deliver his promises. Maybe fully believing that he will. Or maybe for some of you, you find yourself struggling. You believe it, you know it, you've heard it at church, but it doesn't quite feel like it's actually going to happen. And how do we deal with that tension? How do we press forward in purposeful lives in Christ when it seems like the ball's in God's court and we're waiting on him? And that's where the people of Israel found themselves. As we open up to the book of Exodus and start this series, we see a people who were in a place they did not want to be. Let's just say it like that. The Israelites, this people of Israel, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, found themselves in the world superpower at that time, found themselves in the land of Egypt. And before we even look at Israel and the situation they were in, we've got to ask, how did they get here? You know, we open up Exodus and there's all these great stories. Many vacation Bible schools have chronicled the 10 plagues and all that happens in the book of Exodus. But do we ever stop and ask, well, how did they get here? And the answer is, of course, when you go back, the answer is actually not found in Exodus. It's found in Genesis. And there's only so much we can say on that this morning because we want to get through chapter 1 and chapter 2 today. But as you look at Genesis and what happens, our scripture reading was read. It gives us a little insight there. But in the story of Genesis, God wants to have a partnership with human beings. He creates human beings, male and female, in his image, wants to have partnership with them. Ultimately, they chose a different path of sin, and that created a rift in the relationship that they had with God, the Father. And you kind of go through Genesis 1 through 11, and you see just the spiral of what it looks like when people decide to make their own way rather than to partner with God. Have you experienced that before? We think we know the best way, and it ultimately results in us hurting ourselves and other people. And that's exactly what you see in Genesis 1 through 11. Yet all hope is not lost. God calls a man named Abram, or Abraham, as we might know him, and makes a promise to him. It says, I'm going to make you a great nation, and your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars of the sky or the sands of the sea, and you're going to be in a great land flowing with milk and honey. It's going to be a land of blessing. Everything's going to be taken care of. And so God partners with Abraham. Yet the problem was Abraham and his wife, they were awaiting some promises or awaiting for God to work in their own life because his wife Sarah was unable to have kids. And without kids, there's no descendants. And without descendants, there's no great nation. Yet God made this big promise of this great nation, that would be numerous descendants and in a land of blessing. And he also said that he's going to use that nation to bless the rest of the world. So the promise was much bigger than Abraham and his family. I'm going to use your family, bless all other families of the world. Yet Abraham found himself in this moment. And actually, Abraham struggled quite a bit to trust God. Although he ultimately did trust God, he and his wife end up taking things into their own hands at times. And in fact, there's multiple occasions where Abraham finds himself in a foreign land. And he actually does wrong to some of the leaders of these foreign nations. And he lies to them and actually brings the curse of God on them by giving over his wife to them because he was worried about his own life. And he actually says, in technically a different time, different place, but technically kind of true, he says, she's my sister. We won't go into that today. And ends up bringing God's curse on some of these foreign nations. And so Abraham struggles to trust that God's going to work in those situations. And then he and his wife decide to take matters truly in their own hands, to bring themselves their own descendants. And they end up taking one of Sarah's handmaidens, named Hagar, who we find out was an Egyptian. And they treat her like a slave and bring her in, and she bears Abraham a son. His name's Ishmael, but then Sarah deals very poorly with this Egyptian slave named Hagar. And in that, you kind of see as things are taken into their own hands. And whether that was cause and effect, could keep us talking for a while. But the point is, there's a lot of history here when you talk about Israel and Egypt. It doesn't start in Exodus. It starts in Genesis. And it starts with humans taking matters into their own hands, and there's consequences for that. There's a domino effect of brokenness that takes place. And so through that, Abraham makes a covenant with God, and as Grady read for us today, it prophesies. God prophesies that this very thing, that Israel is going to go into a foreign nation, they're going to be there for over 400 years, and they're going to find themselves enslaved. But it says God is going to deliver them. But it's going to be a moment, it's going to be a valley where it seems like God is silent and he's not there. And so through Abraham, God does end up blessing Abraham with a child, and his name's Isaac, and then Isaac has a son named Jacob, and then Jacob has many sons, 12 sons, who make up the 12 tribes of Israel. And there's a whole story at the end of Genesis about Joseph, who was one of Abraham's sons, who, long story short, through famine and through all the trial and tribulations of Joseph's life, as he himself was sold into slavery, ends up rising, becoming high up in the kingdom of Egypt, and is able to and there's all kinds of brokenness and all kinds of hurt relationship that takes place between Joseph and his family. But ultimately, during a season of famine, because of the power, Joseph ends up yielding in Egypt. He's able to bring his family safely into the nation of Egypt, which was the world's superpower, but with superpower becomes super resources. And their family were able to be taken care of in this nation with God working in the life of Moses, ultimately for his people Israel, to give them a secure place to grow. Because again, he's going to make them a nation that has descendants as numerous as the stars and of the sands of the sea. And ultimately, this goes back to that promise that was made to Adam and Eve, or that partnership that was made to Adam and Eve, which was to be fruitful and multiply. So all that to say, there's a lot there and a lot we could say about how the Israelites find themselves in Egypt. But we open up the book of Exodus, and there they are. The problem was Joseph died, no longer had influence, and we're told a new king arises. But let's look at the context here. In Exodus chapter 1 and verse 7, It says, but the Israelites who were in Egypt at this time, they were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly and increased in number and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. And if that language what we should infer is it should take us back to God's original partnership with Adam and Eve, is be fruitful, multiply, fill the land. And now we open up the second book of the Bible and it says, and God's people, they were fruitful, they multiply, they were filling the land. However, now we're in a broken world and a broken system, and it's in this land called Egypt. And what we come to find out is that there was this new king to whom Joseph meant nothing. Joseph is ancient history at this time. He's not there to represent his family and to seek their good. And he came to power in Egypt. Now, the first king Joseph dealt with was grateful for Joseph and grateful for his work he had done. And so he cared about Joseph's family and made sure they had a good, secure place to grow and to find satisfaction, to find peace. But this king, he did not. And for whatever reason, he did not like the Israelites. And we actually find out in Exodus 1 and verse 9 as we continue on in the chapter here. He says, look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far numerous for us. He says, come, let us deal shrewdly with them. Let's be wise about this, and let's plot. How are we going to control this people? It says, lest they multiply, and if a war breaks out, there's this fear. He's demonizing the Israelites. He's painting a picture. If they grow, they're going to join our enemies, and they're going to fight against us and escape us from the land. And what's amazing about this story is this is a story that has played itself out in history over and over again in broken human systems and broken human nations. I probably don't even have this to state those situations, but I will. We see it here in Israel, where Israel are foreigners, they're immigrants in the nation of Israel, and they're rising, they're succeeding, they're doing well, and that causes the Egyptians to fear them, and the king demonizes them and tries to get the people to be unwelcoming to them and to not receive them. Many other times in history, this has taken place. When you look at the story in Nazi Germany, this was the story that the Germans, and even some of the German Christians, would tell about the Jews. And that they're rising up. They're seeking evil. They're going to take over our nation. And so there was all sorts of dogma and false stories that were told historically, we know this to be true, in order to paint Jews in a bad light. Why? So that they could justify, to create fear and to justify why they might be able to treat these human beings horribly and as not created in the image of God. We look at it in our own history in the United States. You think, how could the system of slavery be justified for so long in the United States of America, a nation that claims freedom for all, the pursuit of happiness for all? And the answer is, let's create fear about people groups. Let's scare people about others who are thriving among us and demonize them, paint them in an evil way, and ultimately that'll justify us treating them poorly. This is in the same mindsets of modern white supremacy today that takes place. If we demonize the immigrant among us, if we demonize people who are different than us among us, it justifies us to treat them poorly. Not to say nations shouldn't have rules and what immigration looks like, all that, but the point is this, is when we begin to justify treating other people badly, the way that we do that is by causing fear in others, that they're going to join our enemies. They're going to work against us. And this goes far beyond the policies of nations and the history that's taken place. The truth is, it happens. When we look at other churches and other people across town or whatever it might be, we create fear about those people. And what it does is it allows us to justify us not treating them as we should. It can happen in our families too. If your family has ever had a situation where it's broken apart, so often what it is, you start talking about one family member and you start here's their motives. Here's what they're really wanting to do. They're wanting to work towards our demise. They want power. They want control. But we create fear about each other, and it justifies us treating one another as less than we should for people who are created in the image of God. And that's exactly what happens here in Egypt. This new king who wanted to consolidate power, like a good king in the kingdom of Egypt, or you might say metaphorically in Babylon, the kingdoms of the world, he identified a people that he didn't feel like he had control over. And like a good king, I want to consolidate that. I want to keep my power. And so he then demonizes the Israelites and creates the story of fear that they're working against us. And in verse 11, it says, "Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens." And the thought of, we can work them so hard, they're not going to have time to think about how to overthrow our nation or to work against our good. But the irony is, but the more that they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more that they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were the dread of the people of Israel. To draw another illustration where this took place, it's not a secret to you that when Christians first began to develop and followers of Jesus began to grow, they were treated like this. They were different. They had different mindsets, and that led to seasons of intense persecution. The irony of it is, and the more they were persecuted, the more the church began to grow. That's just the truth. And so Pharaoh here persecutes the Jews, oppresses them, and the irony, it doesn't even say, God is yet to be mentioned. But as we're going to see, it's kind of a wink, wink. We know what's going on in the background. Because they continue to multiply and they continue to spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. Moving on. And so they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves. And in the midst of this wasn't enough for Pharaoh. In the midst of this, continue on in the chapter. We're not going to have time to look at every verse in the chapter today. But in the midst of this, Pharaoh creates this plot. Is how do I start? Okay, they're continuing to grow. They're continuing to develop. How do I get control of this? And he comes to these midwives, those who were delivering babies at that time, particularly two of them, named Shiphrah and Puah, and he tells them, if a Hebrew son is born, I want you to kill the baby. And as that way, they would start doing population control. And what's ironic here is these midwives he actually commissions to do his dirty work. They actually silently and in the background work against his evil will. And they continue to deliver the healthy babies and to help them escape the hands of Pharaoh. And sort of the irony of Shiphrah and Puah is that so far, and actually through the entire story, through Exodus, the Pharaoh is never named. And there's actually debates. Which Pharaoh was this? Why is he not named? And the truth is, and commentators and others, they have good ideas. Okay, it's this one or this one. But the irony is that this Pharaoh who's trying to consolidate control, make a name for himself, for his glory to be remembered for generations and generations, he's not named. And so he never fully gets that legacy that he was striving for. Yet these two lowly midwives here in the story, they're named. This is just a silent protest of power that today, in 2025, we are still saying the name of Shiphrah and Puah, who decided to rebel against the world superpower at that time because they knew this was wrong and this was not their job and not what they should be doing. But then it continues on, and Pharaoh realizes that he's been supplanted, and he puts out this edict, and he commands all of his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. And you just can't imagine this darkness, right? It's just so hard to imagine. Yet we've seen it take place throughout history over and over again. As when people start not getting what they want, people in power start not getting what they want, there ends up being bodies that follow. Is that they're going to take it into their own hands. That's how genocides take place. That's how wars break out. Is things become more aggressive and conflict arises and begins. Pharaoh commands them to start throwing the Hebrew sons into the Nile River. But again, we see faithful people take action. And we're introduced to this young Hebrew couple who have a baby, a Hebrew boy, and the mother is able to hide that baby for over 3 months and to keep him from Pharaoh's sight and the Egyptian officials' sight. Yet at some point it became too much, and so she creates this little ark, kind of boat-like structure out of reeds, and she places her baby, and you can't imagine, oh my goodness, like there's just the pain that it must have been to have to do this, but she puts him in the Nile River and hopes, and really in the background, faithfully trusting that he would be all right. And ironically enough, it is Pharaoh's own namesake, his own daughter, that comes down to the Nile River and discovers him. It says, and Pharaoh's daughter actually commissions some Hebrews, which ends up being Moses' sister and his mother, to raise this child she has found. Right? There's this dramatic reversal. Again, God's not mentioned, but hint, hint. And so what we see here in verse 10, it says, and when the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, his mother and daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, because she said, I drew him out of the water. Now, this isn't a mistake. This wasn't Pharaoh's daughter saw this baby and, oh, how cute, I want a son. But Pharaoh's own daughter is acting in this faithful way of knowing the difference between right and wrong, and is supplanting her own father's will and silently rebelling against this wrong edict that was put out. And so she takes Moses into her household. We're not told how she gets away with this. Does she hide this from her father, or how this takes place? We're just told it does. And she is able to silently but faithfully supplant her wicked father's will, and she saves Moses. And this is where we stop with the story of Moses this morning. But you see a very clear foreshadowing of Israel. They've been put in subjection to this evil king, yet these faithful people in various ways are just silently but faithfully supplanting his plans. And now it's like this true hero moment where the child is born, his name is Moses, and this is kind of the part in the movie where you're like, oh man, it's about to take place. They're gonna, this guy's gonna rise up, and he's going to be the hero of the story. We're gonna get to that next week, and let's just say he doesn't become the hero in the story by his own strength. And we're gonna skip through a passage here right now that we just don't have time to address. We're gonna look at it next week as we look at the calling, the God who calls. But this morning is not about Moses. Because even though God wasn't mentioned through the entire chapter so far and through chapter 2, at the very end of chapter 2, we're all these little things that just happen to take place that work for the good of the people of Israel, that deliver this baby named Moses. It all seems like this happy coincidence. But here's what we're told at the end of chapter 2 and verse 22. And the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. And their cry of rescue from slavery came up to God. And if you're a Jew reading this for the first time, you've read Genesis, you're like, yep, I remember him. That God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God remembered and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those promises made to them in the book of Genesis. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Different translations say different things there. It'll say God took notice of the Israel's predicament, but God knew. He knew exactly who his people were, never forgot them, never left them behind. He knew their voices like a good shepherd knows his sheep, and he knew exactly what they needed, even though at this time even though they were crying out for help, did not quite know exactly who they were crying out for, or at least over the generations, it seems to be somewhat forgotten. But God remembered. He remembered his people. He heard their cries. He saw them where they were. And that's the beginning of this beautiful story of Exodus. And so this morning, as we're introduced to a God who shows up when his people are oppressed, when his people are in the valley, wondering what's next and how things are able to work out for good, we're first introduced to this God who remembers. And each week, we're going to learn something about God through the book of Exodus. And this week, it is this, that God is a God who remembers his people no matter what situation. And so this morning, 3 things to think about as we wrap up. Number 1, in seasons that it seems like God is silent, he is still at work. When it seems like God is silent, that just means his work is not yet finished. And he's working for our good, even if that good is not ultimately what we expect for or ask for. And then the second thing is that even small and faithful acts are able to be used by God for good. We see this in the midwives. We see this in Moses' parents. We see this in Moses' sister in the story. And ultimately, we see this in Pharaoh's own daughter, is that small, faithful acts are able to be used by God for good. And as we, each day, as we trust that God is working on our behalf, and as we decide to supplant the kingdoms and ideologies of this present age, these temptations for pride, these temptations for control, these temptations to be great among the world, as we see in Pharaoh, instead, and we can't solve all those problems, but instead we commit ourselves to small, faithful acts for us on the other side of the cross, small, faithful acts following in the way of Jesus, embodying his way. And even if we can't see the end, and even if we one day, just like Abraham didn't get to see the end of this, just like Joseph didn't get to see the end of this story, and more than likely there's going to be some situations in our life we don't get to see the end. Yet that's not ours to do. Instead, we commit ourselves to small, faithful acts, supplanting the kingdoms of this world, but working for the kingdom of God. And then the last thing is that we serve a God who sees injustice and suffering and remembers his promises to his people. We serve a God who remembers. This morning, if you're in the valley, if you're caught in that cycle of looking for what's next, looking to be delivered, yet it seems God is silent, I encourage you, 1, lean on your church family, but together we're going to encourage you that God's still working. It's not a completed picture yet. He knows. He knows, as the scripture said. He knows your ultimate good. He knows what you need. He knows what's going to bring you ultimate satisfaction in life, but also ultimate wholeness and peace, even if it's not the way we would define it. We serve a God who remembers, and he remembers you. He sees you even when it doesn't feel like you're being seen. He hears you when it doesn't feel like you're being heard. And he knows you even when it feels like there's no one else who's close enough to know. Whatever your need be this morning, whether it's to get some things off your chest, we invite you to take a step in our prayer room. We'll have a couple of our shepherds there to meet you. And these are shepherds. These are men of God who love you and care about you and love God and are going to point you to the God who remembers. But maybe you'd like to respond publicly this morning. Maybe you want to take a step towards the God who remembers and become a follower of Jesus this morning. We'd love to aid you in that as you commit your life in faith, repentance, and baptism, and ultimate submission to Jesus as the ultimate good King. Whatever your need might be, we invite you to come while we stand and while we sing.
Thank you for joining us this morning. If we can help you on your journey with God, please reach out to us. You can find out more information about the Northeast Church at northeastchurch.com.